All right, so we are starting in book 4. We're about to finish book 4, starting with Discourse 30, entitled Bhagavan Vishnu confers a boon on the Prajetas, who then return to their city and marry the foster daughter of the trees. Andy was saying that sounded like an intriguing title. Vidura said, "What reward did the sons of Prachina Barhi, mentioned by you, get, O holy sage, by propitiating Sri Hari through the hymn sung by Sri Rudra?" So Rudra had taught them a hymn to propitiate Sri Hari. "Having accidentally met with Lord Shiva, using a name for him like Kailasavasa, I am sure the Prachetas, who were able to win the grace of that divine personage, the favorite of Bhagavan Narayana, the dispenser of liberation, must have eventually accomplished the supreme object of their life. What did they achieve, O Maitreya, a pupil of the sage Brahaspati, either here or hereafter?" Maitreya replied, "In obedience to the commands of their father, King Prachina Barhi, the Prachetas propitiated Lord Sri Hari, the creator of all bodies, through worship in the form of repeating the hymn sung by Sri Rudra, and austerities carried on in water in a lake almost as extensive as the ocean, some huge lake. At the end of a myriad years, I think earlier it was said to be 10,000 years, Bhagavan Narayana, the supreme and eternal Purusha, appeared in his placid form, soothing by his effulgence their agony, the agony of their long 10,000 years of austerities. Mounted on the shoulders of Garuda, he looked like a cloud settled on a peak of Meru, was dressed in yellow, and had the Kaustubha gem suspended from his neck, by the splendor of which he drove away the darkness from the quarters. Not only his cheeks, but his entire face shone brightly with brilliant gold ornaments presenting a variety of attractive hues. He wore a glorious crown and was waited upon by his 8 weapons. It says weapons, though they're not all weapons. The attributes he holds in his hands: the conch, the lotus, the arrow, the bow, the mace, the sword, and the shield, as well as attendants, sages, and rulers of gods. His glory sung by Garuda like the kinnaras, which is, it said that the music of Garuda's wings is like the wind in his feathers is like constantly whispering the glories of Narayana. Encircled on the bosom by a wreath of sylvan flowers whose splendor vied with that of goddess Lakshmi, adorning the space enclosed by his 8 long and rounded arms, Lord Narayana, the most ancient person, spoke to the sons of Barhishman, who had sought his protection, in a voice like the rumbling of clouds, casting a merciful look on them. The glorious Lord said, "Seek you from me any boon you choose. God bless you, O princes, observing as you do the same sacred vows by virtue of your amity. I am pleased with your mutual affection. The man who will remember you every day at dusk will not only have the same affection for his brothers as for his own self, but will cherish friendly feelings for all living beings. And I will confer the desired blessing, as well as a brilliant intellect, on them who will glorify me every morning and evening with a concentrated mind through the hymn taught by Sri Rudra. Inasmuch as you have joyfully carried out the command of your father, your bright renown will accordingly pervade all the worlds. An illustrious son will be born to you, who will be in no way inferior to Brahma the creator in point of virtues, and who will fill all the 3 worlds with his progeny." The sage Kandu got a girl with eyes charming as the lotus through Pramlocha. And the spirits of the trees, O princes, took charge of the girl, who had been abandoned by her mother. Moved with compassion, they celebrated Moon God, the Raja of plants, Somadeva, put his index finger dripping with nectar in the mouth of that girl who was oppressed with hunger and crying. Commanded by your father, who is devoted to my path, that's obviously news to them, since when they left home, their father was not devoted to his path. But as we know, Narada came and instructed him in their absence. Commanded by your father to beget children, marry that girl with lovely hips without delay for the said purpose. So all of them are supposed to marry her jointly. Let that girl with a lovely waist be a wife devoted to you all, who are observing the same vows and are possessed of a similar disposition. And she too will observe the same vows as you all and is possessed of a similar disposition. So that there will be no fear of conflict between yourselves or between you and her, and your married life will be quite happy. For 1,000,000 celestial years, with undiminished strength of body, you will enjoy by my grace, and so 1,000,000 celestial years, that's 360 million earth years. By his boon, they will enjoy undiminished strength of body for 360 million years, as well as heavenly pleasures. Thereafter, with the impurities of your heart burnt through unceasing devotion to me, and recoiling in disgust from those hell-like pleasures that cause harm to other beings, you will ascend to my abode. In the case of those whose actions are dedicated to me and whose hours are spent in talks relating to me, even though they have entered into the life of a householder, home life is not recognized to be a source of bondage for such people. For through the aforesaid talks given by the expositors of the Vedas, I, the all-knowing Lord, enter the heart of such devotees as if in an ever new aspect. This is Brahman, as those who attain to me never give way to infatuation, grief, or joy. Maitreya continued. Even as Lord Vishnu, who is supplicated by men, the bestower of the objects of human pursuit, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, and the greatest friend, spoke thus, the Prajetas, who had been rid of all impurities in the shape of rajas and tamas by his darshan, addressed him with joined palms in a voice choked with emotion. The Prajetas said, Hail, hail to you, who relieve your devotees of afflictions, whose excellent virtues and names have been declared as the source of all blessings, and who surpass in quickness both mind and speech, meaning quicker than mind and quicker than speech. Hail again to you, the way of whose approach lies beyond the range of all the senses. Hail to you who are unconditioned and serene by virtue of your being established in your essential nature, and in whom duality falsely appears due to the mind. Hail to you who for the purposes of creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe assume various forms through the attributes of Maya. Hail to you, known by the name of Sri Hari, and consisting of sattva unmixed with rajas and tamas, whose realization puts an end to transmigration. Hail to Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, the Lord of devotees. Obeisance to you who have a lotus sprung from your navel. Obeisance to you who are adorned with a wreath of lotuses. Obeisance to you whose feet resemble a pair of lotuses. And obeisance to you, O Lord, with lotus-like eyes. Salutations to you who are clad in stainless robes, yellow as the filaments of a lotus. We offer our obeisance to you, the abode of all creatures, as well as their seer. To us who are afflicted, you have revealed your form which puts an end to all miseries. What other favor could be bestowed? Only this much should be done by masters who are fond of the poor, that they remember the latter at the opportune moment as their own. O destroyer of all that is inauspicious, for such remembrance brings solace to those who are thus remembered. Seated within the heart even of the most insignificant creatures as their inner controller, how could you fail to know that which is sought by us, hankering after some object? To us that have won the pleasure of the Lord, who is not only the teacher showing us final beatitude, but the goal itself too. That alone is the desired boon, O Lord of the universe. Yet, O Lord, we do seek one boon from you, who are beyond Prakriti, and indeed there is no limit to your glories. That is why you are extolled under the name of Ananta, literally endless. When the celestial tree of Parijata is easily got, a bee does not resort to another. Having directly reached the soles of your feet, what other things should we seek? So long as we revolve in the whirligig of birth and death under the impulse of our actions, dominated as we are by your Maya, let us have in every life the fellowship of your loving devotees. We are not prepared to equate with the fellowship of your loving devotees, enjoyed even for half a moment, the delights of paradise, nor final beatitude itself, much less the blessings sought by mortal men. In the company of such devotees are sung the delightful stories which slake the thirst for enjoyment, and we find no enmity with, nor fear of, any kind for any being. In their midst is glorified Bhagavan Narayana himself, the goal of the recluses, through beautiful stories, again and again, by men who are free from attachment. How can the meeting of such devotees of yours, who go about with the intention of purifying the sacred places with their feet, saying not that not being purified by the sacred places, but that they purify the sacred places with their devotion. How can the meeting of such devotees not be welcome to him who is afraid of transmigration? As for ourselves, O Lord, we have, through a moment's association only with your beloved friend, Lord Shiva, the source of this world, found today our refuge directly in you, the best physician for the malady of birth and death so very difficult to cure. Whatever we have properly studied, the efforts we have made to propitiate our teachers, the Brahmanas and the elders by constantly waiting on them, the salutations we have offered to all worthy men, as well as to our kinsmen and brothers, nay, to all living beings in an uncavilling spirit, the austerities duly practiced by us in water for a long time without food, all this, O Lord, we desire to convert into a means of pleasing you, the all-pervading Spirit. Swayambhuva Manu, Brahma, the self-born, and Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, and others whose intellect has been purified through asceticism and self-realization, extol you, though unable to perceive the end of your glory. Hence we glorify you according to our own lights. Hail to you, the supreme, meaning according to our own understanding. Hail to you, the supreme Purusha, the same to all and untainted by Maya. Obeisance to Lord Vasudeva, who is Sattva personified. Maitreya went on. Thus glorified by the Prajetas, and pleased with them, Srihari, who is full of affection for those seeking refuge in him, and is possessed of irresistible might, said, "Be it so," and returned to his abode, even though the princes, whose eyes had not been sated with his sight, did not want that he should go. Now the Prajetas emerged from the water of the ocean-like lake, and were filled with anger to see the earth covered with trees that had grown tall as if to block the way to heaven, since they'd been there for 10,000 years, so there's a whole forest in their way. Then, like Kalagni Rudra, Kalagni Rudra literally means time fire Rudra, but referring to Rudra and the aspect of the destroyer who burns the worlds with fire at the Pralaya. So like Kalagni Rudra, at the dissolution of the three worlds, they breathed out fire and wind through their mouths in rage, O king, in order to strip the earth of all vegetation. This is the kind of outburst of power that can occur as kind of a side effect of the long and intense tapasya, such as that they've gone through here. And the reason why it's kind of a delicate practice. Seeing the trees being reduced to ashes, that they had started doing this, Brahma the creator arrived and pacified the sons of Barhishman by words of wisdom. Seized with terror, such of the trees as survived, because he stopped them from burning all trees, bestowed their daughter upon the Prajetas under the advice of Brahma the self-born. Bowing to the commands of Brahma, the Prajetas married Marisha, the daughter of the trees, through whom Daksha, the son of Brahma, was reborn as a result of his having slighted the great Lord Shiva. He was the same Daksha who begot, as directed by God, progeny of his choice at the dawn of the Manvantara presided over by Chakshu, the sixth Manu, the Chakshusha Manvantara, the former creation having been dissolved by the flux of time. Even while being born, he, this rebirth of Daksha, overshadowed with his own splendor the brilliance of all resplendent beings, and they called him Daksha because of his proficiency in rituals, since Daksha kind of means dexterous or skilled. Having installed him to the office of the chief of the Prajapatis, as before, Brahma, the beginningless creator, appointed him to the task of extending and preserving the creation. while he charged all the other Prajapatis with their respective duties. And thus ends the 30th discourse in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita. Discourse 31, the continued story of the Prajetas. So Maitreya continued. After that, when wisdom dawned on the Prajetas, so after they enjoyed earthly and celestial pleasures for a million divine years, meaning 360 million earthly years. When wisdom dawned on the Prajetas, they remembered the words of Lord Vishnu, and leaving their wife to the care of their son, immediately quitted their home. On the seashore in the west, where the celebrated sage Jajali had attained perfection, they took a vow of inquiry into the Supreme Spirit, which culminates in the realization of the same, the Supreme Spirit, as the one animating principle permeating all life. The sage Narada, who deserves the praise of gods, of devas and asuras alike, saw the Prajetas, who had fully controlled their breath, mind, speech, and sight, who could remain squatting in a particular posture as long as they would, keeping their body absolutely motionless and straight, and had concentrated their mind on the transcendent Brahman untainted by Maya. Seeing him come, they rose, fell prostrate at his feet, welcomed him, and worshipped him with due ceremony. And when he was comfortably seated, they spoke to him. The Prajetas said, "Welcome is your visit today, O Devarishi. Thank God that you have appeared before us. Your going about, like the revolution of the sun, O Holy One, brings fearlessness," meaning similar to how the sun banishes the fears of darkness and the dangers of the night. What was taught to us by Lord Shiva and Bhagavan Vishnu, who is beyond sense perception, has almost been forgotten, strongly attached as we were to our home, or master, since of course that was 360 million years ago, and for all that time they've been enjoying sensory pleasures. Therefore, kindle once more in us the light of spiritual wisdom, revealing the truth of things, whereby we may easily cross the ocean of mundane existence, which is so difficult to cross. Maitreya went on. Requested thus by the Prajetas, the divine sage Devarishi Narada, whose mind had entered the most glorious Lord, addressed those rulers of men. Narada said, "That birth, those actions, that period of life, that mind and that speech alone of human beings are worth anything in this world, through which Sri Hari, the Almighty Lord and the soul of the universe, is resorted to. Of what avail to a man in this world are the threefold birth, meaning birth through good parentage, birth through investiture with the sacred thread, which means through the Upanayana ceremony in which a Dvija becomes twice born, which is why it's listed as the second birth, and through consecration, since the preparation for the performance of a yajna is considered to be a rebirth again, each time you do it. So those are the threefold births. Duties enjoined by the three Vedas, or even a span of life extending to the lifetime of a god, which indeed they have just enjoyed. Again, of what use is learning, or asceticism, or flowery speech, or the faculty of attending to a number of things at one and the same time? Or what benefit shall a man derive from a penetrating intellect, strength of body, or the keenness of the senses? Or what shall a man gain by yoga, sankhya, sannyasa, or a study of the Vedas? And what benefit will flow to him from other means to the attainment of salvation, if all these are not employed in the service of Sri Hari, who bestows his very self? Truly speaking, the self is the culmination of all blessings. And Sri Hari is the beloved self of all living beings, and it is he who enables the jiva to realize its true character. Even as the stem, boughs, and side branches of a tree are nourished by watering its roots, and just as all the indriyas are nourished by sustaining life through food, so by offering worship to the immortal Lord are all worshipped. Even as water emanates from the sun during the rainy season, meaning that the sun, that the heat of the sun causes atmospheric conditions that produce rain, and returns to the same source in the dry season, being evaporated by the rays of the sun. And just as mobile and immobile creatures evolve from the earth and return to the earth, so does this animate and inanimate creation proceed from Sri Hari and return to him. As sunshine has no existence apart from the sun, This creation is that absolute essence of the universal spirit, inasmuch as it appears at times, even as the Indriyas appear in the waking state and remain dormant in deep sleep. As a matter of fact, however, the 5 gross elements, the 5 organs of action, and the 5 senses of perception, as well as the phantom of diversity arising from it, are absent in him. Just as clouds, darkness, and light appear, O rulers of the globe, and disappear in the sky by turns, so do the potencies of Brahman in the form of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva appear and then disappear in the absolute. Sattva being like a clear sky, Rajas being like storm clouds, and Tamas being like the night. So does the process continue uninterrupted. Therefore, worship you as one with yourselves, Sri Hari, the ruler even of the highest gods. Sri Hari himself, the one soul of all embodied existences, who is time, the unmanifest and the supreme Purusha, and who has by his energy cast out the material creation, as in emanated it from himself. By kindness to all living beings, by remaining contented with anything whatsoever, meaning remaining contented no matter what comes, and by taming the senses, Lord Janardana is soon propitiated. Lured into the heart of pious souls, rid of all cravings and purged of all dross by their constantly growing devotion, the imperishable Lord surely does not escape from such a heart any more than the ether locked in it, proving his amenability to the control of his servants, to being controlled by his servants. Controlled in that by devotion you can draw him to you. Sri Hari, who loves the destitute looking upon him as their wealth, and knows the bliss inherent in devotion, does not accept the worship of those foolish men who through their pride of learning, affluence, pedigree, and deeds show disrespect to destitute devotees. How can a man who has any sense of gratitude in him give up even for a while him who has no regard for Sri, even though she waits on him, much less for kings and gods seeking her favor, inasmuch as he is perfect in himself, but who is subject to the will of his servants? Maitreya resumed. Having thus told the Prajetas what has been reproduced just now and discoursed on other topics relating to the Lord, O Vidura, so we're getting an abridgment of what Narada said to them. He discoursed on some other topics, and then he returned to the abode of Brahma. Having heard the praises of Sri Hari, which wipe out the sins of the world and which were uttered by the mouth of Narada, and contemplating on his feet, the Prajetas too attained to his realm of Vaikuntha. I have thus repeated to you, O Vidura, the dialogue between the Prajetas and Narada, containing the praises of Sri Hari, which was all you asked me. Sri Shuka continued. I have thus told you about the posterity of Uttanapada, the son of Swayambhuva Manu. O jewel of kings, hear about the line of Priyavrata as well, who having received instruction in spiritual lore from Narada, and subsequently enjoyed the sovereignty of the globe, divided the globe among his sons and duly attained to the divine abode. So it's actually been some time since the Bhagavatam cut back to Shuka and Parikshit, since they were going along about the posterity of Uttanapada and the children of Manu, but then Vidura asked Maitreya a bunch of extra questions and got a whole extended portion that wasn't taught by Shuka to Parikshit. So now we've kind of caught back up to Shuka's narrative. But Vidura was overwhelmed with emotion when he heard the sacred story interspersed with accounts of the invincible Lord Srihari as told by the sage Maitreya, the son of Kusharu. With his eyes full of tears, he bore the sage's feet on his head and installed Srihari's feet in his heart. Vidura said, Your merciful self, O great yogi, has brought me within sight of the other shore of ignorance, where dwells Srihari, who goes to meet those that have nothing to call their own. Sri Shuka went on. With these words, Vidura bowed low and, taking leave of him, proceeded with a peaceful mind to Hastinapura with intent to see his own kith and kin. He who listens, O king, to this narrative of kings who had given their mind to Sri Hari should attain longevity, affluence, glory, security, the way to happiness, as well as worldly power and prosperity. Thus ends the 31st discourse on the story of the Prajetas in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita, composed by the sage Veda Vyasa and consisting of 18,000 shlokas. And that is the end of Book 4. Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 5. Book 5 is largely about cosmology. I know that Andy and some other people have been asking various cosmological questions about the huge measurements of the lokas, the oceans of milk, and the nature of Mount Meru, and what exactly is meant by the earth in some of these stories and all of that. So we're about to really get into that in depth. Still kind of in the context of stories, as everything is, but we're really going to get into that subject matter. Discourse 1, the story of Priyavrata. The king Parikshit said, Priyavrata was a devotee of the Lord and reveled in the self. How did he, O sage, rejoice in family life, which obscures one's true nature and subjects one to the bondage of actions? Certainly it is not desirable, O chief of the Brahmanas, that people like him who are free from attachment should get identified with their home in this way. Indeed, O Brahmana sage, exalted souls whose mind has found peace in the shade of the feet of Sri Hari, enjoying excellent renown, cannot conceive a fond attachment to their family. I have this great doubt in my mind, O holy Brahmana, as to how Priyavrata, who was attached to his wife, house, children, and so on, attained perfection and came to develop unswerving devotion to Lord Sri Krishna. Sri Shuka said, what you have stated is right. They, however, whose mind is engrossed in enjoying the honey of the charming feet of Lord Sri Hari, of exalted fame, do not generally give up their most blessed path of listening to the narrative of the Lord, who is the beloved of his devotees and ascetics of the highest order, even though it may be obstructed by some impediments. So meaning that, yes, they'll get involved in family life. They have to take care of their wife. They have to raise their children, go through all of the work of raising children and managing a household, etc. But if they have devotion rooted firmly in their heart, then even if for a while they have to take a break from hearing the stories of Sri Hari because they're busy with raising their kids or whatever, they'll keep coming back to it. Once they've tasted the devotion, once they've acquired a taste for it, they're going to want to keep coming back to it. And it is a well-known fact, O king, that when that prince Priyavrata, who was a supreme devotee of the Lord and had, through the adoration of Narada's feet, easily come to know the true nature of the highest reality, and was about to undertake a vow of contemplation on the spirit, was called upon by his father, Swayambhuva Manu, to rule over the earth because of his being a unique repository of hosts of excellent virtues mentioned in the scriptures. He did not welcome it, although the command of his father was inviolable, for he had, through constant absorption of his mind in Lord Vasudeva, completely resigned all the activities of his senses and organs of action to him, and he thought that on his assuming the reins of government, his self would be obscured by the non-self, even though the latter has no reality. Thereupon the glorious Brahma, the self-born, the first among the gods, who kept himself acquainted with the designs of all the worlds, being ever engaged in the thought of promoting the creation, which is a product of the three gunas, came down from his abode, the Brahma Loka, surrounded by the Vedas and his retinue. Shining like the moon, and being worshipped at many points on his way through the heavens by the foremost among the gods who rode in their aerial vimanas, and glorified along the route in separate groups by troops of siddhas, gandharvas, sadhyas, charanas, and sages, he approached the prince, illumining the valley of Mount Gandhamadana by his brilliance. Since evidently that's in or near the valley of Gandhamadana is where Priyavrata was at the time. Recognizing there from his mount, a swan, that he was no other than his father, the glorious Brahma, Narada quickly rose and waited upon him with articles of worship along with the father and son, Swayambhuva Manu and Priyavrata, their palms joined in prayer. The glorious Brahma, the first among embodied beings, who was offered worship, and whose hosts of virtues coming down to earth and excellent glories were sung in appropriate words, spoke as follows to Priyavrata, casting at him a smiling look full of compassion. The glorious Brahma said, "Listen, dear child, I speak this truth to you. You ought not to find fault with the Lord, who cannot be known through the ordinary means of cognition, and whose bidding we all compulsorily obey. I, as well as Lord Shiva, the source of the entire universe, your father, and this Maharshi, Narada. No embodied creature is capable of undoing what he has ordained, through asceticism or erudition, through yogic power or intellectual acumen, through affluence or religious merit, with the help of another or by oneself. Living beings, dear Priyavrata, ever maintain their connection with a body, bestowed on them by the unmanifest Lord, for birth and death, grief, infatuation and fear, joy and sorrow, as well as for doing work. Fastened strongly, dear child, to a big rope in the form of the Word of God, with the tight strings of the three gunas, as well as of duties and denominations bearing the stamp of these gunas. We all bear offerings to God, even as quadrupeds with a string passed through their nostrils bear loads for human beings. Taking whatever form the Lord has ordained for us according to our attachment to actions dominated by a particular guna, and conducted by him even as the blind are led by one endowed with vision, we undergo pleasurable or painful experiences decreed by God, O dear Priyavrata. Reaping the fruit of his destiny. Oh, I see. All right. Bye, Dr. Nishan. Thanks for coming. Reaping the fruit of his destiny without identifying himself with the body. Even a liberated soul maintains it till that destiny has been reaped, even as one who has woke up from sleep still remembers what one experienced in a dream, but he no longer indulges in actions or cravings which may invest him with another body. He who has not been able to subdue his senses is exposed to the fear of rebirth, even though he may roam about from forest to forest. For the six foes, which mean the five senses and the mind, are ever with him. What harm can the home do to the wise man who has subdued his senses and delights in the self? He who is keen to subdue the six foes should in the first instance strive to conquer them while remaining at home, for he alone who has ensconced himself in a stronghold is able to overcome even powerful enemies. And in this case, the stronghold in which you ensconce yourself is yourself. When these foes grow weak, in other words, when your senses and your mind no longer pull you around, but when you are in control of them, the wise man may roam about at will, may go about in the world without being drawn into things. Resorting to the citadel of the lotus-like feet of the Lord, whose navel is the seat of a lotus, you have thoroughly conquered the six enemies. Therefore, enjoy on this earth the blessings bestowed by that Supreme Person, and wholly freed from attachment, be established in the self. Sri Shuka continued. Thus instructed, Priyavrata, that eminent devotee of the Lord, most respectfully accepted the command of the glorious Brahma, the Guru of the three worlds, with the words, "Very well," his head bent low as a token of his smallness. The glorious Brahma, too, who was duly honored by Manu, left for his abode, the Brahmaloka, contemplating on his own asylum, the Supreme Brahman, who is beyond the ken of speech and mind and is incapable of being dealt with, while Priyavrata and Narada kept gazing on him with a serene look until he vanished into the sky. Manu, too, whose ambition was thus fulfilled by Brahma, the highest of the gods, appointed Priyavrata, with the concurrence of Narada, the foremost of Devarishis, to maintain stability of rule on the terrestrial globe, and himself gave up the desire of enjoying home life, which is like a most fearful lake full of poisonous water in the shape of sensuous pleasures. Thus appointed by God's will to do work, the Emperor Priyavrata, whose impurities of mind had been burnt, nay, who had become pure by virtue of constant meditation on the feet of the Lord, the most ancient person, whose supreme glory is capable of destroying the bondage of the entire creation, ruled over the earth, just in order to show his great regard for the exalted by obeying their command. He then married a daughter named Barhishmati of Vishvakarma. Vishvakarma is a deva, the architect, crafter deva, who is also a Prajapati. And how wonderful that through her he actually begot 10 sons, who were evidently as great as he in amiability, virtues, actions, comeliness of form and prowess, as well as a daughter, Urjasvati by name, who was younger than all of them. They all bore the names of the fire god. So all of his sons were given names of Agni. Agnidra, Idmajifa, Yagnabahu, Mahavira, Hiranyareta, Grahaprashta, Savana, Medhatiti, Vitihotra, and Kavi. Three of these, Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana, were lifelong celibates. They took to a study of the science of self-knowledge from their very infancy and entered the order of recluses. Continuing in that ashrama and given to self-control, and that ashrama I'm meaning the sannyasa ashrama, the sannyasa stage of life, even from their youth. These foremost seers indeed wonderfully attained absolute self-identity with the Lord, who is the very self, the inner controller of all living beings, and whom they realized within the heart, purified by virtue of their uninterrupted and supreme devotion, resulting from their ceaseless remembrance of the charming lotus-like feet of Bhagavan Vasudeva, the abode of all species of living beings and the asylum of the fear-stricken. By another wife, too, he had three sons. Priyavrata, had three sons, Uttama, Tamasa, and Raivata, each of whom presided over a manvantara associated with his name. So those were three future Manus, Uttama Manu, Tamasa Manu, and Raivata Manu. His sons being thus given to self-control, the high-minded Emperor Priyavrata ruled over the globe for 1,100,000,000 years. The enemies of righteousness were scared away by the very twang of the bowstring pulled by his stout arms, possessed of strength, which consummated all his efforts without any obstruction. Nay, like a man who has forgotten himself, he had his judgment clouded, as it were, by Barhishmati's daily growing expressions of excessive joy, her rising from the seat and going forth to meet him, amatory gestures as natural to women, smiles and glances half concealed by bashfulness, and delightful jokes, etc. Even to the extent the glorious sun god lights the earth's surface, in the course of his circuit round Mount Sumeru, he shines only on one half of that portion and leaves the other half shrouded in darkness. He did not like this. His superhuman, I'll explain, let me read a bit and I'll explain what this means, since this is a somewhat obscure passage. His superhuman glory having been enhanced by virtue of his adoration of the Lord, he thereupon, like another sun, made 7 circuits after the sun, in his effulgent car as swift as the sun, determined to turn night into day. So here we get into cosmology in a very otherworldly sense. So observing to the, so Priyavrata observed that the glorious sun god lights the earth's surface in the course of his circuit round Mount Sumeru. When we say his circuit round Mount Sumeru, we're going to be describing a model here called Bhumandala. Bhumandala is usually the Sanskrit term that's being translated as the earth's surface in this context. It refers to a flat circular model which clearly corresponds to the ecliptic of the Earth, meaning the astrological plane that is the Earth's orbit around the sun, since it's defined as that which the sun goes around the rim of, which is indeed an accurate description of the ecliptic. The center of the circle, in this case, is the Earth, since we're talking about from the Earth's perspective, and the center of that is Mount Meru, which gets described as being like the axle of the wheel. We'll get into more exactly of what Mount Meru is, or Mount Sumeru. Meru and Sumeru are the same thing. It's just sometimes called Meru for short, but Sumeru is the full name. So he's saying that to bring more light to the world, Priyavrata entered a chariot, and on the opposite side from the sun, shone using the power of his tapas like a second sun to dispel the darkness, and did 7 rounds, these rounds being not days but years. 7 rounds like a solar year through the solar system. I guess he stopped after 7, realizing that it was harder than he thought to do the job of the sun. But the tracks that were sunk by the fellies of the wheels of his chariot came to be the most celebrated 7 oceans, which divided the earth into the 7 dvipas, or 7 continents. So here we're describing that he drew clearly seven circular rings, the 7 oceans between the 7 dvipas. It's a model of 7 concentric continents and alternating with 7 concentric oceans. The dvipas are known as, and this is counting from the center out, Jumbo Dvipa. Jumbo Dvipa is the central continent. The entire Earth that we know is just a tiny part of Jumbo Dvipa. Then there's an ocean, then Plaksha Dvipa, Shalmali Dvipa, Kusha Dvipa, Kroncha Dvipa, Shaka Dvipa, and Pushkara Dvipa. These are all concentric rings of land. As regards dimensions, each succeeding one in that list is twice as large as the preceding one and is placed beyond the ocean and encircling it. So you have Jumbo Dvipa, a ring ocean, Plaksha Dvipa, another ring ocean, Shalmali Dvipa, etc., and each one gets double in width, the preceding. The 7 oceans contain salt water. So the first ocean around Jambudvipa is an ocean of salt water. The next ocean between Plaksha Dvipa and Shalmali Dvipa is an ocean of sugarcane juice. And then the third ocean between Shalmali Dvipa and Kusha Dvipa is an ocean of wine, and so on, with an ocean of ghee, an ocean of milk, an ocean of fluid curds, and lastly, an ocean of pure non-saline water, an ocean of fresh water, and serve as a moat, as it were, one for each of the 7 dvipas surrounding each one, like I was describing. They are equal in extent to the dvipa enclosed by them. So meaning that the diameter of the salt ocean is equal to the diameter of Jambudvipa, the diameter of the sugarcane ocean is equal to the diameter of Plaksha Dvipa, which is double the diameter of the Jambudvipa and the salt ocean, and so on. And are situated one beyond and encircling each of the 7 dvipas severally. So here there's a footnote kind of explaining this, the relative position of the 7 dvipas and the 7 oceans. So Jambudvipa has a width of 800,000 miles. So for comparison, the width of the Earth that we experience, the spherical planet we live on that we can measure, is about 8,000 miles. So just the centermost continent is about 100 times the diameter of the Earth that we can experience today, and is girded by an ocean of salt water equal in width. Beyond that, and double. So we're talking about 1,600,000 miles is Plaksha Dvipa, and then the sugarcane ocean is equal in size. So you could drop our whole Earth in the sugarcane ocean and it would like vanish in it. That's the scale we're already talking about. On the other side of this ocean of sugarcane juice, and twice as large in extent, 3,200,000 miles wide, is Shalmali Dvipa. And then that ring, these are all rings, enclosed by an ocean of wine with the same diameter. Enclosing that in a ring, and twice as large, 6,400,000 miles across, is Kusha Dvipa, surrounded by an ocean of ghee, equal in width. On the outer coast of that ocean, encircling it like a ring, and twice as thick, so now we're up to over 1 billion miles wide, is Kroncha Dvipa, girded by an ocean of milk, equal in width. Or sorry, not 1 billion miles. What would that one be? 12,800,000 miles, is Kroncha Dvipa. Beyond the ocean of milk and twice as large is Shaka Dvipa, enclosed in its turn by an ocean of fluid curds with the same diameter. On the other side of the ocean of fluid curds and twice as large is Pushkara Dvipa, itself encircled by an ocean of pure water, equal in width. So this disk, I'll get to that in a moment, Sunil. This disk that we're describing, the measurement is on the scale of the distance from the Earth to the sun. We're talking about a body of land on the scale of our solar system, or on the scale of a large chunk of our solar system. In which loka are these dvipas located? Bhumi loka, the same loka as us. This is the description of the full extent of Bhumi loka. We, according to the Shastras, like the Bhagavatam, are kind of quarantined as a feature of the Yuga within a tiny portion of this. And a tiny portion of Jambudvipa in the center is the whole Earth that we experience today. When we get this chapter, book 5, well, not this chapter, but this book, the Skandha of the Bhagavatam, we'll get into describing these dvipas in more detail, especially Jambudvipa, and we'll get into the tiny little part of it that we are in. Priyavrata, the spouse of Queen Barhishmati, created this system. He created the 7 seas and the system of the 14 rings. He severally made his dutiful sons, the ones who had not taken sannyas, Agnidra, Idmajifa, Yajnabahu, Hiranyareta, Grahaprashta, Medhatiti, and Vitihotra by name, each the ruler of one of these divisions, Jambudvipa and so on. So Agnidra was the ruler of Jambudvipa and so on, with the 7 dvipas in that order. And his daughter, Urjasvati by name, he gave away to Ushana, that's the sage Shukracharya, the Asura Guru, also the Deva of the planet Venus. It was of her that Devayani, the celebrated daughter of Shukracharya, was born. Such an achievement on the part of devotees of the Lord, devotees who by resorting to the dust of his feet have been able to conquer the 6 senses, is not to be wondered at, for even a pariah immediately shakes off his bondage if he utters the Lord's name only once. By pariah, it usually is translating Chandala, meaning like an untouchable, or what in modern India would be called a Dalit, saying that even they can shake off any bondage of karma by uttering the Lord's name. Thus possessed of immeasurable strength and prowess, King Priyavrata at one point felt disgusted at heart, since he regarded himself very unhappy, as it were, on account of his contact with the world of matter, which dogged him even after he had taken shelter under the feet of the Devarishi Narada. And he said to himself, "Oh, what a wrong I have done, and that I have allowed myself to be hurled by the senses into the terrible and deceptive pit of sensuous pleasures, which are products of avidya. Therefore, enough of these. Fie upon me, a veritable ape for the amusement of this woman." In this way, he condemned himself. And the light of wisdom, recovered by the grace of the supreme deity, he proportionately divided the earth among his devoted sons, as aforementioned, and abandoned the queen, whom he had enjoyed as a source of pleasure, along with the imperial fortune, like a dead body. In other words, like the spirit abandons the dead body when it casts it off. And disgusted at heart with this world, he followed once again the path chalked out for him by the divine sage Narada, realizing in his heart the glory of the pastimes of Srihari. These are the verses actually sung of old in praise of Emperor Priyavrata. Who else than the Almighty Lord could do the work accomplished by Priyavrata, who in his attempt to disperse the darkness produced the 7 oceans out of the tracks sunk by the Felis, nay, who divided the earth for the convenience of living beings, and fixed the limits of every dvipa by allocating separate rivers, mountains, and forests. Devoted to the servants of the Supreme Person, he looked upon as akin to hell the fortunes of the subterranean worlds, the patalas, the heavenly regions, or svargas, and the terrestrial globe, as well as those acquired through actions or through yoga. Thus ends the first discourse, forming part of the story of Priyavrata's conquest in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita. Discourse 2, an account of Agnidra, the firstborn son of Priyavrata. Sri Shuka began again. His father being thus engaged in the practice of devotion, Agnidra, who followed his father's commands, duly protected the people of Jambudvipa, the centermost and smallest of the aforementioned continents, though still about 100 times the size of our Earth. He protected those people as his own progeny, keeping his eye on dharma. Seeking the Pitriloka, he collected the requisites for worship. In other words, he was seeking the Pitriloka as his goal for after that birth ended. He collected all the requisites for worship, and with concentration of mind and asceticism, adored the glorious Brahma, the ruler of the Prajapatis, in a valley of Mount Mandara. Having come to know this, the glorious Brahma, the foremost of all created beings, sent down to him an Apsara, Purvachitti by name, who used to sing in Brahma's court. There was a most delightful garden attached to his hermitage, to Agnidra's hermitage, in the valley of Mount Mandara. This garden contained ponds and lakes that charmingly resounded with the cries of waterfowls, karandavas, which are a type of duck, swans and the like, that were awakened by the notes uttered by pairs of land birds perched on golden creepers intertwined with the boughs of densely growing trees of every description. And the Apsara Purvachitti sauntered about that garden. The steps she took in the course of her exceedingly graceful stroll exhibited the charm of her gait, and at her every pace the beautiful ornaments she wore about her feet made a jingling sound, hearing which the prince slightly opened both his eyes, resembling a pair of lotus buds, till now closed in the practice of deep meditation, and espied her. Like a female honeybee, the celestial damsel was enjoying the odor of flowers, not very far from him, and carving a passage for love into the minds of men by her gait, sport, bashful and modest glances, musical voice, since she's singing to herself, and her limbs, all ravishing the mind and eyes of gods and men. And her full breasts, head of hair, and girdle were thrown into a state of charming agitation as she walked with quick paces, when assailed by swarms of honeybees, maddened by the sweet fragrance of her words, accompanied with a smile that escaped from her mouth, and which were like nectar and wine. The prince succumbed to the dominating influence of the most powerful god of love, who had found an open door to his heart the moment the prince saw her, and addressed her like a dunce in the following words. "Who are you, and what do you intend to do on this hill, O great sage?" She's saying to him. Are you the inscrutable Maya of the all-powerful supreme deity? "O friend, do you wield that pair of stringless bows for your own protection? Or are you in search of some unwary game?" Sorry. He is saying this to her. Are you in search of some unwary game? Wielding that pair of stringless bows, he refers to her eyebrows. "These two arrows of your worshipful self," her eyes, her piercing glances, "winged as they are with lotus petals, are gentle and lovely without hilt, yet extremely sharp-pointed. We wonder whom you intend to aim them at, wandering as you do in the forest. May this expedition of yours conduce to the good of us dull-witted creatures. These pupils of your worshipful self, the bees, are chanting about you the Samaveda along with the Upanishads and incessantly glorifying the Lord. They resort to the showers of flowers dropped from your locks, even as hosts of rishis, accept the recensions of the Vedas traditionally followed by their own school. We simply hear, O sage, the notes of the partridges locked up in the cages of your feet, notes which are referring to the jingling of her anklets, notes which are distinctly heard, though invisible. Wherefrom did you get the yellow splendor resembling that of a kadamba flower on your beautiful circular hips?" Referring to her garments. "Your hips are also girdled with a belt of fire. But where is your bark covering? What lies treasured up, O holy Brahmana, in yonder two horns of hers," referring to her breasts, "which you carry, though you are slender at your waist, and upon which my eyes are riveted? Unique is the scarlet and fragrant paste on your horns, with which, O beautiful one, you are perfuming my hermitage. Be pleased to show me your native place, O great friend, the inhabitants of which carry on their bosom in this way such a strange pair of limbs that agitate the mind of people like me, and many a wonderful treasure like sweetness, amorous gestures, and nectar in their mouth." What is the food with which you nourish your body? For from the chewing thereof, O dear one, issues an aroma as of oblations poured into the sacred fire. Surely you are a ray of Lord Vishnu, the protector of the universe. That is why your ears are adorned with brilliant earrings resembling two unwinking crocodiles, since those are similar to the earrings that Vishnu wears, the crocodile earrings. Your countenance is akin to a lake, with its bewildered eyes resembling two leaping fish, its snow-white rows of teeth corresponding to swans, and the mass of your curly hair appearing like swarms of honeybees hovering close at hand. The yonder ball, which when struck by your lotus-like hand flies about in all directions, makes my eyes roll about, my mind being confounded. Do you not mind your unloosed braid of curly locks? Lo, this mischievous and lustful breeze is blowing off your lower garment. Through what kind of austerities did you secure this beautiful form, O great ascetic, wrecking as it does the austerities of others practicing them? You ought to practice asceticism with me, O friend. Or maybe Brahma himself has shown his grace on me. I shall not forego you, my beloved friend, who have been conferred on me by Brahma, the adored of the Dvijas. Neither my mind nor my eyes turn away, fastened as they are on you. Be pleased to take me your servant, O fair-bosomed damsel, wheresoever you please, and let these obedient companions of yours, the bees, follow me. Sri Shuka went on, by thus employing a language clever in expressing sensual things, Prince Agnidhra, who possessed the intelligence of gods and proved a past master in winning over young women, propitiated that celestial damsel by showing her great regard. She too, whose mind was captivated by the intelligence, amiability, comeliness, youth, splendor, and nobility of that leading hero, then enjoyed with that lord of Jambudvipa earthly as well as celestial pleasures for a period extending over 10 crore years. Through her, it is said, that foremost of kings, Agnidhra, begot 9 sons, Nabhi, Kimpurusha, Harivarsha, Ilavrata, Ramyaka, Hiranmaya, Kuru, Prahadashva, and Ketumala by name. Interesting, the second of those sons, Kimpurusha. By the name Kimpurusha, it indicates that that was a third gender child, a transgender child. That's indicated by names Kinnara or Kimpurusha. Having brought forth 9 sons, one each year, so 9 sons in 9 years. So they enjoyed for this huge span of time pleasures together, and then at the end, they finally had children. A crore is 10 million, so they enjoyed over 100 million years. They were just together, and then in the last 9 years, they had these 9 sons, and left them at home. And then Purvachitti once more joined the service of the god Brahma. So she left him and went back to Brahmaloka. The aforesaid sons of Agnidhra, who were well built and strong by birth through the grace of their mother, were allotted their due share by their father and ruled over the divisions of Jambudvipa apportioned to them, which were also named after them. King Agnidhra, who was not sated with sense delights, constantly thought of that celestial nymph as superior to everything else, and secured through deeds enjoined by the Vedas residence in the same heaven with her, the heaven where the Pitris live in delight. On the demise of their father, the 9 brothers married the 9 daughters of Meru, Meru Devi, Pratirupa, Ugra Damstri, Lata, Ramya, Shyama, Nari, Bhadra, and Devaviti by name. Thus ends the second discourse, entitled An Account of Agnidhra, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita. Yeah, I'm thinking that that might be a good place to stop. It's just after 10, and the next story goes into the story of Lord Rishabha, which, oh yeah, Radhaji, you have finals, okay. We're next going into the story of Rishabha, which is kind of a story that runs through several discourses, and so I think it would be ideal to kind of start with those all at once next time rather than get a little bit into it and then break. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. We got into a little bit of the cosmology of book 5 there with the 7 Dvipas model laid out in brief, but we're going to get far more detail about every one of the Dvipas and so on. So yeah, we can end there. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Devala. So real quick, who just married who?
At the very end there?
Very end. What the heck just happened there?
Yeah. So Agnidra, the Raja of, getting a bit of an echo here from someone. Agnidra, there, I fixed it. Agnidra, the lord of Jambudvipa, had 9 sons, and his 9 sons married the 9 daughters of Meru Deva. In the order given. So there was the list Nabhi, Kimpurusha, Harivarsha, Ilavrata, etc.
Okay.
And they married the list given in the same order, kind of matched up 1-to-1 with Meru Devi, Pratirupa, Ugra Damstri, Lata, etc. So right. Those are the 9 daughters. Meru is the god of the mountain Sumeru. He had 9 daughters, and those were at the center of Jambudvipa, which was the realm of these 9 princes who were put in charge of it. And so they kind of.
Who were the prince's father or parents again?
The prince's father were the lord of Jambudvipa, Agnidra, and the Apsara Purvachitti, who was his.
Okay, now I'm putting it together. Right, of course.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of genealogy in the Bhagavatam.
Yeah. Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah. All right, here I can stop the recording.